just to kind of reintroduce everybody, you just met Amy. She is the Executive Director of the Colorado River Authority. Seated next to her is Cody Stewart. He's the Director of Strategic Engagement at the Colorado River Authority. And you know Zach Renstrom, he's our local General Manager of the Conservancy District, and as you saw, also a board member of the authority. So great group. You can see that we've got some amazing horsepower paying attention to this issue every day, and that was not the case even 5 years ago. And so that is heartening, and excited to pull on a few of the threads that Amy put out during her remarks. So maybe to start, you mentioned that across the state and here locally, we have a number of initiatives that involve quite a bit of money. And over the last few years, the federal government has authorized really billions of dollars towards the support of the Colorado River system. Could you maybe talk a little bit more about some of those programs and how those come into effect here in Utah?
It's a great question, and I hope you're not all tired of hearing from me at this point. This is my favorite part of the program, where you're not just hearing prepared remarks. We get to interact a little bit more, and I think that that's always more stimulating, hopefully for the audience as well. So I'm going to focus a little bit on some of the federal funding that we're seeing, this once-in-a-generation funding coming into the Colorado River system through the Biden administration, right? And there are really two major buckets of funding that we are kind of eligible to receive or tap into in Utah. The first is under the bipartisan infrastructure law. The 4 upper division states, if you remember the maps, Utah being one, so Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Wyoming, are entitled to receive about $50 million total of bipartisan infrastructure law funds for infrastructure improvement that really is intended to support an agreement that was congressionally legislated in 2019 called the Drought Contingency Plan. And that is, those activities under the Drought Contingency Plan include things like system conservation activities, demand management, and also infrastructure improvement. So this BIL funding, we're in our second year of programming this funding among the 4 states. A lot of the money is focused on enhanced measurement, on-the-ground measurement, state-of-the-art, remote sense satellite-based data measurement to support some of these activities on the river. So a big influx of federal funds through the BIL. The second big pot is the Inflation Reduction Act. And the Upper Basin has been allocated $500 million under the IRA. And this money is divvied up into several different tranches, so to speak. One, we've spent about $50 million of the did I lose you? Maybe use my outdoor voice for a minute. About $50 million for short-term conservation activities, so things like annual, one-year fallowing programs. But the lion's share of this money, $450 million, will be divided between ecosystem and habitat restoration projects, large scale, on the river, and then secondly, durable conservation activities. And what does durable mean? We're looking at things beyond just short-term fallowing activities and so forth, things like canal lining, improved and enhanced irrigation practices, things that will really contribute, enhance water supplies in the basins. So those are activities that really have an infrastructure component. And kind of a public service announcement with respect to these ecosystem and habitat restoration projects. The federal government, the Bureau of Reclamation, is currently accepting applications for these projects. If you go to our website, if you're interested in potentially putting in or more information, Colorado River Authority of Utah, the application period closes on November 22nd. We are anticipating, I mentioned the more durable conservation activities. That request for applications will be released by the Bureau of Reclamation sometime in mid-November. So right as this other application process closes, that second opportunity will be announced. So that's a lot. I'm going to make one comment, however. This is kind of my personal feeling. We are seeing, again, once-in-a-generation funding from the feds for conservation activities, but at some point this money won't be there. It will go away. And I think we've got to figure out how these activities can persist even in the absence of federal funds, because I think that's what we're looking to in the horizon. So
it sounds like these programs are available both at sort of a kind of an almost institutional level, but also to individual water users in the basin. Maybe I'll ask Zach, maybe if there are any of those buckets of funding that our local water district is looking to tap into.
So we've actually been fairly successful in going after these federal funds. Like just in June, I got a phone call and said, "Hey, could you be down in Los Angeles in 2 days?" And I said no. And they says, "Well, if you come down, we'll give you a $20 million check." And I says, "Okay, I'll make it." I guess if I was in the audience, I'd say, well, why do I care? Where every time I bring in $1 from the federal government, so the federal government's going to spend this money. It's already been allocated to Congress, and the question is who's going to get the money? And so we've been very aggressive about getting that. And every time I can get one of those dollars, that means one less dollar in impact fees that we'll have to collect to build these infrastructure. So we've actually gotten about $50 million in the last few years. For the size of our community, it was amazing. In fact, when I drove down to Los Angeles, the interesting thing about that, I didn't know what to expect. I drove down there and the Biden administration was handing out these checks, and every single check went to an entity in the state of California except for one, and it came here to Washington County. So I was really pleased to see that, and we're going to try to continue that, to be very aggressive to go after those funds to help pay for this infrastructure. And part of the reasons why we are getting awarded these funds is people are recognizing what we're doing here in Washington County, because they see the great efforts that you guys are doing. I mean, the homes that you guys are building now are so water efficient. We're going back and looking at older homes, and we do our lawn rebate or conversion, and that's been very successful. And so people are saying, hey, if you're going to do the right thing, we're going to try to help you. And so that's been also really successful.
That's great, yeah. So tying a couple of these things together, so part of this is a matter of getting the word out, right, Cody? And being in the position that you are, what are some of the steps that the authority is doing to engage the community and communicate the Utah's interest in the Colorado River system?
That's a great question. Let me start by saying I have never received a call asking me if I want to get $20 million. That's a great story, though, and I'm glad you actually cleared your calendar to get down there. Yeah. So, Stacy, to your question, that is my job. Is to the title I have is the Director of Strategic Engagement. My responsibility is to engage with the public, identify groups like this that may be interested, that may have a desire to learn more about what's going on in the Colorado River and how it could impact you. So I think attending events like this, participating in events like this, is one of the things we try to do. We put together a monthly newsletter. We've put together an email distribution list of news articles. In my previous jobs, I worked in Washington D.C. for about 15 years on several different issues, and there's a lot of news, a lot of news stories on the Colorado River, and trying to help people sift through these dozens of stories that come out almost every day. Which ones really matter? Which ones actually are impactful? Which ones should you know? So we created a little news service called Distilled News, where we identify every couple of weeks the 2 or 3 articles that you need to read, from a Utah perspective, that we think would be helpful if you want to be engaged. So that's one of the things. The other one would be advisory councils, and Amy alluded to that earlier with that map of we created these advisory councils, but just really trying to identify people and partnerships and groups that are interested, and then provide them with the information they're looking for.
Yeah, I can really put a plug in for a couple of those things. So I was invited to serve on the Southern Advisory Committee a year and a half ago or so when that was formed. And as part of that, I ended up on this newsletter list, and it is fantastic. So I would really encourage you, if you have any interest whatsoever in this topic, to go online and subscribe to that, because it really does distill the news down to really interesting stories that are right on point and will keep you informed on this. And that's how we got to know each other a bit, Cody and I, on that body. And that's one of the things that sparked the thought of inviting them to this event was, the advisory term implies that we're somehow providing some input, but for my part, the wealth of information has flowed the other direction, and so I wanted to share more of that with you. Could you expand a little bit on that, Cody, on what those advisory councils are meant to do, how they're functioning, et cetera?
Yeah, happy to. So, going back a few minutes, Amy when she made her presentation, she showed that map that had the 3 regional and the 1 topical. So when the bill was passed several years ago, I think the legislature realized that when you create a 7-member board for an issue as broad and as complex as the Colorado River, that board may be a little bit insulated or probably can't accurately reflect all the perspectives in the state of Utah. And so they carved out explicitly some language saying, these advisory councils are probably a good idea. They didn't tell us how to create them. They just kind of suggested, yeah, you probably should create these. And so that was kind of my charge when I got hired, was to create these councils, identify how to set them up. So first we started with these regional. We just said, let's just split the state up into some areas that kind of make sense geographically within the Colorado River Basin. So we did these 3 geographic regions. We've learned, though, over time that the Southern Council we created, the geography is a challenge, and that the distance is so large that to actually have meetings on a regular basis with that group was difficult. So we kind of quasi split it into 2. So we have a southeastern and southwestern. It's still part of the same council, but we now meet separately. But to Stacy's point, really the objective of these advisory councils is to hear input, hear different perspectives, and what that means sometimes is that these councils don't necessarily agree, and people in the room may have very diametrically opposed perspectives on what should be happening, what the state is doing. Is the state doing the right thing? Are the feds doing the right thing? Are the regional groups doing the right things? And we sometimes have to remind them, you don't have to agree. That the purpose here wasn't to necessarily find a consensus position on every issue. You're probably not going to. But by creating these advisory councils, it really is kind of an outlet. It's an opportunity for various perspectives from within communities throughout the state to learn about water issues, learn about the Colorado River, to hear from experts like Amy and Jean and Zach, and to really engage with the people who are in the middle of that space. And so, we've had some hiccups, it took a few months to kind of get these things up and running, but for the last couple of years, we've had some very, I think, effective councils. One of the things I really enjoy is that at the end of the year, they come up with some recommendations that they provide to the board. And sometimes the board actually they're very, I think, appreciative of those recommendations, and are sometimes surprised at the level of sophistication that when you get a group of public citizens and stakeholder groups who think about these things and focus on them, they come up with some really good ideas that I think are actually helpful. And so we think it's serving the purpose. We think that it's engaging the public, getting people the chance to be part of the process, because this is really important. And I think if there's one thing I hope you got from Amy's presentation, this does matter. And I know it seems a little abstract. It seems a little bit out there. Why should people in Washington County or other parts of the state care about the Colorado River? But it really does matter. Our future in a lot of ways depends on our access to water. And I think you all realize that in your day-to-day lives, but sometimes we forget that it is potentially at risk. And there are some challenges in the future, and the state needs to be preparing for that. So hopefully the advisory councils are serving a role in educating and engaging the public.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and maybe to really put a finer point on how relevant this stuff is, I'd like to come back to you, Amy. You gave an overview of it's a lot of words, so I'm going to give them the wrong word, probably the Northeast Arizona Indian Water Rights Act. Am I getting that approximately right? That's a very interesting history and things there. I grew up in San Juan County. My wife was a principal at the elementary school there in Winona Valley, so that context is interesting and close to home to me, but it has some very interesting direct implications for us, especially in Washington County, right? Could you maybe explain a little bit deeper about kind of what that direct line is between what's happening with that act and our water future here?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And again, I mean, I think the key thing, and I want to underscore the fact that I think Utah is generally very supportive of a settlement of the tribe's water rights claims in Arizona. It gives us more certainty when we operate the system, right, collectively. So we want to quantify those rights. We want those rights settled. We support that. We have our own settlement with the Navajo. Why this settlement is unique is that it's allowing sovereign tribes to use water, upper basin water, in the lower basin within any portion of the state of Arizona. And I think from Utah's perspective, we simply, as a sovereign state, want the same treatment as the sovereign tribes in terms of our ability to use our water. And again, there are interpretations of the 102-year-old compact that would say otherwise, but we steadfastly, disagree with that and think that we should be entitled to use our water anywhere within the state, provided we don't cross state lines. Now, I want to underscore something. The water has to be available for use, and you saw my slides on the hydrology. This is what we're grappling with right now. Utah's allocation is 23% of the available supply. Well, if the supply isn't available, we get 23% of whatever is. That could be 23%, God forbid, of zero. But that's what we're looking at. We're not obligated to a finite amount of water in the upper basin because, as we know, Mother Nature doesn't always deliver.
Right. So that really comes into play with the Lake Powell pipeline. That's really kind of what we're talking about locally, is clarifying that would be at least established as a legal right, at least provided that the hydrology is there. So that there's a number of contingencies there, a lot of things that would have to happen, but that would clarify one issue that's been cloudy in the past, right? So Zach, maybe come back to you. I think a lot of folks in this room are pretty familiar with this, but could you talk a little bit further about what some of the local conservation efforts have been and what you're looking at for sort of the next stage of conservation as well as water development?
Yeah, so with water conservation, when we look at the growing our economy and for building, it's interesting because I sit in all these meetings and we go to the electrical guy and they're like, oh yeah, we're going to bring more power in. We pretty much import so much into this county to make it so we have a good life. I think probably 99.9% of our building supplies are imported. Electricity, our food, everything except for one, and that's water. And so we only have so much water, and so we just have to use it at the most efficient way possible. We have to be good stewards of that. And so when we sat down, this is where I give the homeowner builders association a lot of credit, because they sat down with this and we looked at everything that's going on. And so basically it's like, if we want to continue this rapid growth, the economic growth that's going to go on for a sustainable period of time without the Lake Powell pipeline, because that's a big long-term project that will take a long time to build. We decided that, hey, we need to make sure that what we're going to do is we're going to be very efficient. And so instead of just building so many homes, let's see how far we can stretch that. So it gives the economy the ability to build as many homes as can be absorbed by the market. So essentially, that's why we came out with our landscape ordinances. We were using about 60% of our culinary drinking water outside. And we wanted to flip that because we went out and we actually did analysis that showed that the vast majority of that water was being used on landscaping that nobody even touched unless they were like walking to mow the lawn. And so we decided to change that. But on the flip side, we didn't want to become one of these, I think Havasu, that's the ugliest community ever. because all they do is have gravel, and we didn't want that. And so he says, no, we want to have trees. We want to have that green look that keeps the environment cool, that looks beautiful. And so working extensively over periods of time, we came up with landscape ordinances. Inside the home, we were already pretty efficient already, so there wasn't much that we're going to do there. And so we kind of went through, and then we just looked at what available water we have. And right now, we dump a lot of water in the Virgin River that essentially leaves the state of Utah. And so in looking at that and looking at the technology, we wanted to capture that before it leaves the state of Utah. So that's one of the reasons why we're investing heavily into the reuse program. And that's where we basically are going to take our sewer water. It's going to go through a very sophisticated purification system, and then we'll start using that water. In the short term, we're going to be using it solely outdoor, because there's a lot of opportunities to use that water outdoors, like on golf courses or doing ag exchange with the agriculture people. And so if you look at our 20-year plan now, and we're very unique in that we have a 20-year plan in the state of Utah that outlines our goals to make sure that we can continue to build at a very high rate of growth for 20 years if we do all these steps. And that's how it kind of came to pass. And so I don't see anything changing in the near future, because we made the hard choices at the beginning. So I think we are on a good, stable path for the next at least 20 years, and we should accomplish all the things we need to.
Great. Cody, a couple questions to help link what you do with the group in the room. What are some things that home builders can do to become more engaged in the issue? Are there particular challenges generally that you face in your outreach and engagement efforts that you might share with us?
Yeah. I think, let me put it this way. I'm the father of 6 kids. And speaking of education, I have a few of them that actually like to learn. Most of them don't. Even for the ones that like to learn, education is hard. For the ones who aren't really interested, it's really hard. And that kind of applies to generally kind of a public education campaign, is that when the public doesn't necessarily want to learn or know why they should learn, it's difficult to break through. There are so many distractions, so many other things that, your day-to-day life that just takes up your time and interest and focus. And so breaking through the noise is one of our biggest challenges. We do try to do that. A couple things. You already mentioned the distilled news. That's one way, is if people can sign up. I think that certainly helps. We do kind of regular new or media availabilities where if there's something of interest that's going on the national or regional or state level, we'll have Gene and Amy. Gene's the river commissioner. Do a sit down with the press and talk to them about the key issues, explain to them. So public education is a challenge. I mean, it's hard, and trying to make people understand why they should care. Because again, it's water, like a lot of things. Zach was just mentioning a lot of these things that this part of the state kind of brings in. When you live down here, you don't really think about that. You don't think about how Washington County is dependent on a lot of other things happening in other parts of the state and country. Water is one of those things that's in the background. We take it for granted. It's there. Turn on the tap and the water's there. So I don't know if we've quite figured out. I don't have the silver bullet solution, but we're trying to break through. We're trying to, again, through events like these and other these advisory councils. I would suggest, if you have questions locally, talk to Stacy. Stacy has been plugged in now for a few years, and I think kind of the next phase of the advisory councils is we want to actually, I think up until now, as you kind of alluded to, we've been providing you with some information and some background. We'd kind of like to turn the advisory councils in a different direction now. Instead of inward focused, let's have the advisory councils be outward focused. And I think having people like you deliver these messages is probably much more effective than having people like me come down from Salt Lake City and share. So we're going to try to turn the regional or the advisory councils to focus a more public facing direction, so that they can figure out ways to communicate and educate and help people understand really what's going on.
Excellent. So following up on that, Amy, is there one or two specific things that you would really like a Utah home builder to know about? What you're doing, what the Colorado River negotiation and status is?
Just one or two? How much time do we have? I think first and foremost, that the Colorado River is a finite resource, right? we've got to recognize that. We've got to be smart about it. When you've got folks like Zach that are really maximizing water use through conservation activities, I think that's the way to go. The projections for this river are they're pretty grim. We've got our drought of record, millennium drought. We've got a math problem, which I mentioned during my presentation. A tremendously over-allocated system, and I think we've got to grapple with that. With respect to these interstate negotiations, and again, it seems probably pretty wonky, but it is very relevant. It will impact all water users. Again, the 40 million people, the 7 states, the 2 countries that rely on this resource, they're critical. And I showed the slide of the law of the river, that collection of laws and regulations and treaties. I would say that the law of the river is what has kept us out of litigation. The last time we had major litigation on this river was in the 50s and early 60s, right? We don't want to go back to that. These key features of the law of the river, the 2 compacts and the treaty, that's what keeps us out of court, in my opinion. It keeps us coming back to the negotiating table because we don't want to relinquish control to the courts, and we don't want to relinquish control to Congress, right? If we can control our own destiny, that's the way to go. And I am not a practicing attorney at the moment, but I am an attorney, and I'll tell you something, litigation is where we don't want to be on this river. I was at a conference last week, and a representative of the Bureau of Reclamation put up a slide, and I think that the number was 640. At that time, we have 640 days left to negotiate an alternative, again, in the context of this NEPA process that's underway. And it reminded me of a quote by George Mitchell, who successfully negotiated the Good Friday Accord, which ended the Civil War in Northern Ireland, and was also the baseball commissioner, right? Was George Mitchell? For many, I'm showing my age here, right? And his quote is, "We had 700 days of failure and 1 day of success." And I would say that right now on this river, those are pretty good odds. So if we can get our collective act together, we've still got some time, and I think 1 day of success would go a long way.
That's fantastic. I think that's actually a great place to end. So again, thank you so much for coming out today. It was super interesting and informative. So.